I don't need to show you what a bad or a dirty radius arm looks like, but here's a nice dirty one, and we'll go from this to something like this. Nicely cleaned up and powder coated, and new shaft and bearings. Alright, here's the old pin, bushing and bearing, and you can see the amount of crap all over that, and pitting and rust and everything. Like, that's horrible. Should never be in the car, and hopefully never will look like that. Okay, so we're talking about radius arm bushings. We're going to replace the pin, bearing, bushing, and ream out the bushing so everything fits nice. And we'll go over the radius arm and just make sure that everything's good. I just got these back from powder coat, and let's get started. The radius arm itself, when I sandblasted it, I just gave it a good inspection to check everything. I did sand down all the seams, the casting seams and everything, to make it a little bit nicer. But inspecting it, check your shock bolt, make sure you got good threads here, run a thread chaser over them, check your hub shaft. Right here is where the seal rides, so I'm going to make sure that that's a good clean surface. When I sandblasted, I actually taped that off and didn't sandblast that part, because it's, like I said, a machined surface, not sandblast surface. You want it nice and clean, shiny. I'll clean it up with some crocus cloth, make sure it's good. Okay, all around here, you don't want any rust or scale. A little bit of rust if it was all built up right here. You're going to move your backing plate out a little bit, so you don't want that. You want to make sure this surface is all nice and clean. The hole right here, make sure it's nice and clean. You can actually see that there's a hole on the other side, right here. And my assumption would be for the any excess grease. Okay. Another thing you can check, make sure your brake hose bracket here, both rivets are in there. And I would check for any distortion or anything like that. See if any of these tabs look bent. It could have been an accident. You never know what happened before you got the car. Okay, so here's the rear radius arms. Just down inside, you can see where the bushing would sit here, and on the other one, it's the bearing would sit here. Looking down inside, you can see you have that area that's sort of machined, and then it's just sort of rough cast inside. Maybe I have a camera, maybe we'll stick that down there, we'll have a quick peek. And down here you can see the parking brake pin. So, you know, you got your parking brake quadrant here, and then your pin, you can see it on the inside, just down there, that's shiny. But like I said, we'll get a camera, we'll put it down there, and we'll have a look. All right, let's get the camera set up here, and we'll just go down, the bearing one first, and get this where you can see it close enough, and hopefully the shop lights won't reflect too much. Okay, here we go. All right, so if you look down there, you can see a face, that's Stewie, just on the rag there on the other side. But, okay, you can see the machine surface, then it's rough cast, and you get to the other end, you can see a machine surface also for the bushing. So go down the other one here, you can see a little bit more, because you can see that parking brake pin from the parking brake quadrant. Oops, sorry about that. There's your quadrant there, and here we go. We'll go down here, and there's your pin. And there's Stewie looking up at us there. So you can see it's all hollow. The only thing you're going to have in there is a little bit of grease. Okay. All right, so we have the two ends of the radius arms here. You can see this is the hub out end, and that's the hub out end going down like that. Now, on either end of these, well, one will be a bushing, one will be a bearing, a bearing. It's going to have little needles in it like that. And obviously it's going to help the pin roll. The bushing, here it is here. You'll see little lines inside there, and that's to help distribute the grease. There's an angled one, and then there's one about halfway down that goes around the inside there. That's to help move the grease around. And you'll actually notice that also on these washers that go on the outside of the pin. They lock against your radius arms. There's a line through it, and that's to help move that grease around. So this is the end that the bearing goes in. There's the bearing. If it just drops into place, there's an issue. It should be tight fitting. There's two sides to this bearing. There's a flat edge, which you can just see there. And then if I spin it around, it's sort of a rounded edge. The rounded edge goes in first. And actually, if you look on this flat edge very carefully, it'll have a part number. I don't know if you can see it, but it's there. And you will see the part number when the bearing is in. Okay. All right, to help disperse the grease, there's a nylon tube. If you order a newer kit, that's what it'll be. The old kits had a steel tube inside. But I think for cost cutting, they stopped doing the steel tube and they went to this nylon tube. Nylon tube, you'll notice it's tapered, so smaller at one end, larger at the other. And you can't put it in the wrong end. It only fits into one end of this thing. And you just simply drop it in and push it into place. If it's the steel tube that you're using, again, it only fits in one way. It's got a flare at one end, like that, and it will go up to this end. It won't fit through the other end, too small, where the bushing goes. So it'll go in that way. I think before I put this in, I would just grease it up on the outside here, just to help it last longer, because if it's old and been in there a while, this is what it looks like. That's what I removed from these radius arms. Okay, this step is optional. Now I'm going to spray a little bit of, I'm going to use some of this Rust Check Coat and Protect. Just spray it in here, and just to spray all over that rust cast that's inside, all the metal inside, and it'll also go into that tube a bit. I think I'll do it, I'll spray it from both directions, so spray it from this end and spray it from this end, and I'll flip it over and do the same thing and try to get it all throughout this thing. You know, make it last another 100 years. So we'll simply slide this tube in, and it'll go in how far? Well, it'll go in at least the width of that, just of that bearing. So, you know, it's going to go in at least that far, which it does fairly easy. When you go to put this bearing in, if it just falls right into place, then take that tube right back out, because you'll be getting another radius arm. All right, so to put in the bearing here, I'm going to put a little oil just on this surface here to make it go in easy. Put it in there, and you can just sort of start it a little bit, nice and straight. I guess you could put it in with a hammer. I don't want to do that. I'm going to use a threaded rod in the vise here, and a radius arm goes up against this socket that I have here, an old spare socket. And we'll use some washers and nuts on the other end, and just tighten it up, and it'll just ease that bearing right in there. All right, so here it is in the press. You can see I used my socket to press on the radius arm, and here we've got the bearing. Big washer, nice and clean. You don't want any dirt in that bearing. And a couple other washers and a nut. We'll just get the wrench here and go on that way, and slowly tighten this in. Watching this bearing, make sure that it stays straight. We don't want it to cock either way. And that's it. All right, so here we are with one hand. Just winding it in. I put a little oil on there. I have a little bit of transmission fluid and engine oil and a little pump thing. So yeah, just pumped a little bit on there. Anyway, just wind it in. And there it is flush. You don't have to super tighten it. Let's have a look at it. Alright, so I'll grab those washers and we'll have a look. There it is, nicely in. Now, this washer, when it goes on the outside, this big heavy washer here, I'll just put it on the rod. It's going to push up against the side of the radius arm. So that bearing has to be countersunk, or it's not really countersunk, but at least flush with this radius arm. Alright, good. That nylon tube, if I stick my finger in here, I can just feel it, and it comes right up to this bearing. So, and all I did really to get that in was the driving tool to remove everything. I just went around and I used this shoulder right here to just sort of tap that nylon tube right where I wanted it. Okay, here we are putting in the bushing. So again, I have the socket, radius arm up against that on the shoulder, and there's your bushing. You can see there's a seam in the center of it there. All right, and a big washer, a couple small washers, the nut, and the wrench. We're just slowly winding that in, like that. Now it takes a little more effort, it takes 2 hands, so I gotta put the camera down. All right, so the big washer bottoms out, we're in all the way, undo it all, and we'll have a look. Okay, here we go, remove these washers, and have a look. And yeah, it's looking good. If the washer's flat, it's gonna push it so the bearing is, or bushing is right exactly where you want it. All right, this is the bushing end. You can see the brass bushing in there. It's a little bit dark. Anyway, I just want to make sure that nylon is up against it, and yes, indeed, it goes right up to the bushing. So our next step is we're going to hone the bushing so we can get the shaft in. Okay, here's our radius arm reaming kit. Now it comes with this pilot bearing, or pilot bushing, I guess. It goes in to where your needle bearings are, and this bolt goes to where your park and brake quadrant is. So I'll have to take that park and brake quadrant off. Luckily I knew that, and that bolt's going to go through there, and that's going to hold that bushing, which will hold this shaft, which is threaded. See the threads at the end there. And on the hone part, it's threaded to accept that, which makes this hone be exactly straight going through. That's what your whole purpose of this is you want that bushing, the brass bushing here, be perfectly straight and sized to fit your pin. Now there is directions that come with this, but they are pretty feeble. So what we'll do, I'll just give you what I figured out. That part goes in, pretty simple. You're gonna have your lock nut, your lock strap over to this bolt here, which goes down there. So we'll just put that in. There we go. Okay, I needed 2 hands. You see that spacer there? It goes underneath, and it threads into that collar. And then the nut and bolt go on there, and that keeps everything straight. I got the lock tab on, and I'm just putting this shaft in, and then we'll connect the hone to the other end when we see it come out this end. Okay, here's a quick thing just on the hone, how it works. So you'll see that the blades are tapered. So small at this end, thicker at that end, and if you looked in this groove, you can also see that that's tapered. So as you push this blade up with this nut here, it's going to go bigger and bigger. So we're going to start here at the bottom. We're going to lock this nut down and run it through. All right, So to adjust the hone, what we have to do is hold this end here. We're going to thread this. It has two flats on it, there and there. So we're going to turn it one flat, so that one's now going to be on the bottom, the bottom one's going to be on the top. All these blades are going to move up a little bit, and then we're going to wind this lock nut half a turn to equal that turn. And here we go, we're going to do that right now. So, half a turn. The blades will move up as I turn this. So I'm just going to rotate it so the flat's perfectly up. And we'll give it, I can only do a quarter there. And there's the other quarter. And now I'm going to lock this against the blades. All right. And then we'll do it again. Lots of oil. I'm using a tap oil for tapping threads, and then just wind it around and around. I'm winding the hone through. I decided to use a ratchet to turn this with a 12-point socket. That's all I had that seemed to fit it. You can use whatever you got. If you have a tap handle or something like that, that'll work too. Between each pass, clean all this out. Get a blower if you can, or a can of brake cleans, whatever you can, and blow it all out. Get rid of all that debris, and then use it again. Don't forget to use lots of oil. You're also going to try to size it in between each pass, so I can get it to go in. It's going in a little bit, but not very far. Don't expect to do this all in one pass. You'll do several. So here I go. Hopefully this is my final pass. So as I was getting closer to what I figured would be the right size, I started actually going to quarter turns on these two nuts here. So this one and the one on the other end. So hopefully this will be my last pass. I know I've said that before, but that's the way it is. You got to be patient when you're doing this. You're talking about being precise. Before you try the shaft, just make sure there's no debris in here. Give it a good wipe out, spray out, blow out with a gun, whatever you got to do. All right, so I put the shaft through and just extend it a little bit so you can see it there. If I go back and forth any of these directions, I shouldn't feel any play. I shouldn't feel a clunk. If I feel a clunk, that means I've gone too far. Try again with another bushing. But I don't. This should push through with little effort, so you can feel it, feel a little bit of restriction, so it's not just floating right through, easy. And same with rotating it. You feel a little bit of hardness or stiffness to rotating it, but slightly free. I know that's pretty vague. Now we can, I pull the shaft back out again. We'll just give this a good cleanup. You can see where it a little bit's come off on the inside there. All right. Make sure that there's no debris in this bearing as well, or in the tube. We'll just give it a spray with brake clean or something like that, and then blow it out. So while you're not using these, spray a little bit of oil on them, preserve them. You don't want any rust. It is a precision tool, so you don't want any rust on any of this stuff. A couple squirts of oil, put it in a Ziploc bag, and put it on the shelf. When picking a grease, this is what I went with here. I understand this is what the military use in their equipment, and this has got an EP rating, so extreme pressure. I went with it. It's red, matches my radius arm, so all's good. But this is what I'm going to be using to put it in when it's in the car, so I sort of want it to match. So I just opened up the end of the other tube and primed up my my washers and put it all over the pin just to help distribute it. Okay, so when you grease the pin, put your grease gun on here, and here's where the grease comes out. And the grease will go around this end of the radius arm here, and doesn't really get down to this end as easy. It will travel, but I figure why not put some extra grease in here right now. We're going to load up that bearing because you want that to be well lubricated, and put as much in the whole radius arm as you can. It's only going to take so much anyway, and you can install your pin. And then you're going to put on these big washers. Now, again, put grease all through them. It's got that line through it, and that line is to help distribute grease. And lock washer and nut, not a nylock, just a regular nut. And the same at the other end. All right, on my messy workbench, we've got this radius arm all done, all complete, ready to get installed. The only thing missing off here is the seals, which I'll put on when I install it. Great, thank you very much for tuning in. Like, share, comments. Thank you.